Hello and good night. Hello everyone. So this is somehow the revision session for your final examination of CE6110, the existing built environment. As you know, I was the one that developed the questions for you, and most of the questions in the exam papers will be coming from my sessions. But definitely, I believe that if you attend the class or you refer to the materials that are being provided in the Canvas, definitely you can score like this. Okay, you definitely can excel. So I don't think that and it's an open book exam as well. I'm going to touch more detail about it. So don't worry, it will be okay. Okay, let's start. So let me touch on the content of today's sessions. The first thing first, of course, I'm going to explain about the type of examinations, and then next total examination hour, and then how many questions that you have in the exam paper, and then part A and part B, what are the differences between that two, and I'm going to touch on what you have learned, a summary of what you have learned over the academic year 2022-2023, and then further information, the person in charge that you can contact after this. You definitely can contact me if you have further questions about the questions, because I was the one that developed the question for this time. However, the one that will be marking in replacing me will be Dr. Uh, Oluwayemi, Dr. Yemi. So he's going to mark on it, and he will be in charge on the examination day as well. So it would be best that you can contact him. Else, you can contact your module leader, Zoe. Okay. So the first thing first, I'm going to touch on the types of examinations. So as you know that this time you have to do a face-to-face session. So you have to physically attend your examination day during the day, the time, and the venue as stated for you, unless changes are made. For the information about this, definitely the first thing first, you have to ask your module leader of CE6110, which is Ms. Zoe Almazan, or the best another person that is best for you to contact too is Dr. Oluwayemi Olatunjo, yeah, or Dr. Yemi. So he's the one that will be replacing me in terms of conducting the examination day for you, and also to mark your exam papers according to the marking scheme that I have prepared. So you can contact him through his email here. So yes, definitely you can get further information from him. Yeah. So as you know that I have actually explained quite in detail about the types of examination during our session in the class. It is an open book examination, so you're allowed to bring all teaching materials related to CE 6110. However, you are not allowed to search your answer via online. So that means your mobile phone, tablet, or laptop are not allowed to be used during the examination, okay? So since that is an open book examination, so we expect that your answer will be as detailed as possible, because you can definitely flip your teaching materials. So yes, all the best. Total examination hour is 3 hours. Okay, so 3 hours for how many questions? I will explain later. So there will be 6 questions, in the examinations, but you have to kind of answering only 5 of them. 2 questions will be treated as compulsory questions, which gives 40 points. Means that one question is 20 points, another question is 20 points. And then another 4 questions will be treated as optional questions, which you need to answer 3 out of the 4. okay? And each of these questions will give you 20 points, okay? So part A is a compulsory part where you have to answer both questions in that. So one question of it will be based on what you have learned between week 1 and week 5, which you have to definitely have to check in your canvas again under unit 1 to 5. And then this question somehow is a scenario based question where you have to act as a building surveyor to provide your advice as a solution. So the total mark here would be 20 points. And another question will be based on what you have learned between week 19 and week 23, which is under my sessions. So this question has two descriptive or straightforward questions. Each of this will have 10 points. So 10 points plus 10 points will be equivalent to 20 points, okay? So for part B, you somehow for the examination will be treated as optional questions. So there are 4 questions where you need to choose 3 out of 4. So these questions are based on what you have learned between week 19 and week 23. So I've already give you, kind of hint there. Each question has sub-questions. It can be divided into A, B, or A, B, C, depending, of course. And the level of answer here will be based on the mark. So if you see 5-mark questions, definitely is somehow it's like list and describe. So you can see it's not that much. It doesn't require much explanation on that. For 10-mark questions, so it's more or less it's like more defined answer that is needed to to be given, and or explanation is needed, okay? So now let's do some kind of revision. It's not really revisions, like I will do the summary of what you have learned in academic year 2022-2023, which will be potentially part of your examination. So the first thing first would be summary on week 1 to 5. I'm so sorry, I will not cover this one here. I believe that you have to do your own revision, else it's too much for hints, by the way. So what I will cover will be try to summarize on what we have learned in week 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23, which are covered by me for this year. So we start with the week 19. Remember that we learned about the Equality Act 2010. So we start with what is the Equality Act 2010 and what were the the previous legislation before having this act. And then we also covered on 9 protected characteristics under this act. And then we also learn about 3 prohibited conducts under this act, which is discrimination, harassment, and victimization. And I focus more on the discrimination against disability or disabled users. And I touch on 3 adjustments which can be made to ensure that we can avoid discrimination against disabled persons. So we learn about first requirement, second requirement, and third requirement. Definitely you have to read more about that. Reasonable improvement of premise for disabled person also being covered here. And then, yes, we touch on design standards through building regulations and approved documents, where, as you know, that this already, building regulation 2010 already covered, or adopting the Equality Act, the Equality Act 2010. I touch on Part M and / approved document M's, where it specifies how buildings can be designed accessible for disabled users. Okay. So next, we are going to do some kind of summary on week 20. It's about regulations regarding reduction in carbon emissions. So I firstly touch on whole life net zero carbon roadmap. between now to 2050, and then what are the commitments by the UK government in reducing net zero carbon and reducing carbon emissions, sorry. And then we touch on embodied carbon, EC versus operating carbon, OC. What are they? What are the differences between this? Remember that whole life carbon somehow is like mixing EC and OC in that, okay? And then, yes, I touched on the UK commitments, how the government can achieve net zero carbon. I touched on UK Green Building Councils. There are 5 key commitments there. The first one, existing home retrofitting is one of the recommended strategy. Second, EPC enclosure for non-dwellings. And then design for performance, adopting for new buildings, and then whole life carbon measurement and limits, and as well improvement in terms of the infrastructure investment on net zero carbon emission impacts. Also in week 20, part of this reduction in carbon emissions, we learn about strategies in reducing embodied carbon, EC, both for dwellings and non-dwellings, and how buildings regulations are revised. Remember, we learned about approved document O or part O in building regulation, where this, of course, revising this to achieve net zero carbon. I touched on Future Home Standard 2025, remember that? And then designing out construction waste through 5 principles, try to understand what are they. Responsible sourcing, and then low carbon impact strategies, I touched on that. So low carbon impact strategies can be done during construction stage or use stage or end of life stage, okay? And I also touch on strategies in reducing OC or operational carbon for dwellings and non-dwellings. What are the strategies? Retrofitting, incorporating new heating technologies, district heating, hydrogen gas boilers, PV panel installation, and setting up building performance targets, okay? Now let's touch on the summary for week 21, which is under legislation concerning pollution and contaminations. We start by learning about different types of pollutions or contaminations, which is through air, water, and land. And then we learn about enforcing authorities who will be in charge in terms of controlling the pollution or contaminations. And remember, we learn about special sites which require EIA. So we touch on that as well in a part of the session. And then we learn about Environmental Protection Act, EPA 1990. The purpose of this legislation, we touch on enforcing authorities in different regions, England, Wales, Scotland, and North Ireland. And then prescription of part 1 until 10 on the EPA 1990. What are they? So it's good that you can give more, like more time to read this to understand what are these parts. Okay. Now let's move to week 22. So remember, on week 22, we learn about Green Guide to Specifications. First thing first, of course, I touched on the understanding what are the impacts of buildings on environment, and then why green building concept somehow is introduced. Of course, if you see the link, green building concept, somehow we want to use green specification where that can control the environmental impact, okay? And then we learn about green building specifications. Of course, there are different types of, components or materials under that, which are established under Building Research Establishment, BRE. I specify on the recommended specs of building materials, where all this definitely to minimize the environmental impact and carbon emissions. And then I touch on green building rating systems through BREEAM. Okay, there will be 5 project stages under this. The first one is the master plan for community, second, infrastructure project, third, for new building construction, fourth, for the use of commercials, and 5, refurbishment and fit out. And then we also touch on the primary roles of BRE, and we touch on 10 BRIAM assessment categories and what things are covered under each of these category. Remember, we did one exercise, like the final exercise before we wrap up during this time. So what are the categories under this assessment? The first one is energy, second, health and well-being, number three, innovation, four, land use, five, materials, management, pollution, transport, waste, and water. And try to, you know, put more time to read this. Yeah. So now let's move on to the summary on week 23. Remember, we learned about BIM for existing and historical buildings. Yeah. I touched on general roles and application of BIM and how, and then I moved to how it is useful for conserving, management, and future intervention of heritage buildings. What are the useful features of BIM for existing and heritage buildings? And potential use of BIM for existing and heritage buildings also being covered, part of this session. And then I touch on 4 BIM process in heritage project delivery. Would be good that you read further on this. And I also touch on the challenges of BIM for heritage buildings. Yeah. And also part of this, the week 23, I also touch on different dimensions in BIM, starting with 2D to 8D. What are differences between this? And then I touch on standard package and software. Remember, for 2D, what are the software available, 3D, 4D, 5D, and so on. And then the last but not least, I also touch on tools which can be able to transfer the information from the existing and historic buildings into BIM. So that's it from me. If you have more questions or further questions, sorry, if you have further questions about the exams, I mean, if specifically for the exam questions or something that related to the papers, you can ask me. But when it comes to the venue, maybe you want to have further information about other than the questions part of the exam, it will be best that you contact the person in charge for CE6110 exam and paper marking, which is Dr. Oluwayemi Oladun Joye, or Dr. Yemi. So he is recruited as the lecturer in built environment, part of our department. And you can see the email there and the room here as well. So yes. So yes, all the best and good luck. I know that you guys can do it. Do your best and try to score as much as you can. Okay? Take care. Bye. See ya.